If you've been looking for a reason to buy an automobile with a Japanese name, a reason in addition to outstanding quality and dependability, come to Suburban Mitsubishi. Smart cars for smart car buyers.
Clarence Thomas calls for healing after winning a seat on the United States Supreme Court. The High Court takes up an abortion question. And Congress tries to clear the air over the Gulf War cleanup. CNN Headline News, I'm Lynne Vaughn. Abortion was always an underlying issue during the fight over Thomas's Supreme Court nomination. Today, one day after his confirmation, members of the High Court are hearing arguments on an abortion-related case. As Anthony Collings reports, it has to do with recent anti-abortion demonstrations in Wichita, Kansas.
In Wichita and elsewhere, cutting off access to abortion clinics has emerged as a tactic of the anti-abortion group Operation Rescue. In a counterattack, abortion rights activists have won federal court orders banning blockades, claiming they violate women's civil rights.
If the Supreme Court should rule favorably, that is, to uphold the right of women not to be terrorized by Operation Rescue, then it will acknowledge that women are a protected class.
These federal lawsuits have a very chilling effect on our First Amendment freedom of assembly and freedom of association. People get very nervous about associating with us if they think they're going to be dragged into some multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit.
The Supreme Court case grows out of Operation Rescue blockades in the Washington, D.C. area 2 years ago. Court orders against them were based on an 1871 civil rights law once used against the Ku Klux Klan to prevent attacks on blacks.
And they said, well, if the Ku Klux Klan, why not conceivably somebody else? Although it's very hard to support in anything that they said on the floor of Congress that that's what was meant, that it should apply, for example, to women seeking abortions.
Hoping to continue its blockades, Operation Rescue is asking the Supreme Court to rule that the Ku Klux Klan law does not apply to abortion clinics, a position supported by the Bush administration and anti-abortion groups. They deny that the blockaders are anti-women.
That's absurd, because so much of the pro-life movement is made up of women. Most of the major pro-life organizations are headed by women. Americans United for Life, the pro-life law firm, half the lawyers on the staff are women. I'm a woman, as a matter of fact.
Some abortion rights advocates fear that a ruling favoring Operation Rescue will also signal the court's readiness to overturn legalized abortion. This is the first time the court has agreed to decide whether women seeking abortions are protected by the civil rights law. A ruling is due by July. Anthony Collings, CNN at the Supreme Court.
Newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas won't take his seat until next week, and it may be next month before he hears any cases. Some people say they are worried Thomas's confirmation ordeal might leave him bitter. Others are hoping the highly public probe into charges he sexually harassed a former aide will make him a more sympathetic justice. Thomas's mother had special thanks.
We got the victory. Yes. Thank you, Jesus.
How does it feel to be the mother of the
it feels
Supreme
good.
Court Justice?
Thank you, Jesus.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to let them know when God for you ain't no man. And I know my child got God in him. Yes. With all his trials he went through, God brought him through. I know it. And I know God had the last word.
Professor Anita Hill says she does not regret going public with her charges against Thomas. She says she hopes other women will not be afraid to complain about inappropriate treatment on the job. And she says she's glad her accusations touched off a public debate about sexual harassment.
One of the things that has happened over the last week is that people have started to talk about this issue. It's almost as though a silence has been broken, and women who are talking about experiences that they had never spoken about before. And that should not die today. It should continue on. We should continue to come forward. And I hope that no one will feel that they could not come forward. I hope that this does not prevent someone or make someone afraid to come forward.
Hill is not commenting directly on Thomas's confirmation vote. In about an hour, the U.S. Senate is scheduled to try to override President Bush's veto of a bill expanding unemployment benefits. But even Democrats concede they will probably fail. The legislation would provide up to 20 additional weeks of jobless payments.
Mr. President, this recession is not over. We have a record number of people out of work. We have the highest number of people who have run out of their unemployment benefits that we've had in this country in 40 years. 40 years. And we're seeing the claims continuing to creep up for additional people running out of their benefits.
President Bush has labeled the $6.5 billion measure a budget buster. He is pushing for a less expensive version drafted by Republicans. A spokesman says Syrian President Hafez al-Assad and U.S. Secretary of State James Baker made progress during 2 days of talks in Damascus. Baker is trying to work out the final arrangements for a proposed Middle East peace conference. He travels to Israel later today. A news agency in Tunisia says the PLO and Jordan have agreed on the composition of a joint delegation to the conference. There is another ceasefire agreement in Yugoslavia, although this one was mediated by Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. The outcome is the same as the previous ones. It has failed to stop the fighting. State-run radio says at least one person was killed in the latest clashes. Russian President Boris Yeltsin is throwing his weight behind the peace effort. He met separately with the leaders of Serbia and Croatia at the Kremlin today. Voters in the independence-minded Soviet Republic of Armenia are choosing a president for the first time today. Their current leader is heavily favored in the polls. Armenia has voted to break away from the Soviet Union, but its independence has not been recognized by Western countries. After years of refusal, the Bush administration is now willing to discuss limitations on the Strategic Defense Initiative with the Soviet Union. Wolf Blitzer examines what's behind the shift in position.
In a significant shift in policy, the White House says it's now ready to accept limitations on the deployment of the Strategic Defense Initiative. For years, the Reagan and Bush administrations were unwilling to accept any restrictions on land, on the sea, in the air, or in space. The U.S.-Soviet summit in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986 nearly collapsed when the Soviets proposed such limits. But now, U.S. arms negotiators in Geneva have informed their Soviet counterparts that the U.S. is prepared to do exactly that.
We hope the new climate between the U.S. and the USSR, as reflected in the recent Bush and Gorbachev initiatives, will make it possible to reach an agreement facilitating the deployment of limited defenses.
U.S. officials express hope that this new flexibility will result in the reopening of the 1972 ABM, or Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This will allow the deployment of the new, more limited Star Wars program known as GPALS, or Global Protection Against Limited Strikes. And officials stress this will protect both the U.S. and the Soviet Union against accidental, unauthorized, or third-country ballistic missile launches. As part of the deal, the U.S. may be willing to share information with the Soviets.
The threat from third-world ballistic missiles is going to confront the United States this decade. There's not much question about that. But it's going to confront the Soviet Union earlier and probably more severely.
U.S. officials express hope this policy shift will encourage Congress to approve more funding for SDI in the pending 1992 budget legislation. The administration had originally asked for more than $5 billion. The House cut it to $3.5 billion, and the Senate, in its version of the defense bill, accepted $4.6 billion.
The $5.2 billion in times of economic problems that we're having throughout the country is simply much too much to the American public.
In the coming weeks, a House-Senate conference committee must come up with a final number, and the administration is now hoping that the U.S. shift will encourage the House conferees to accept the Senate number, or as much of it as possible. Wolf Blitzer, CNN, the Pentagon.
The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has awarded French professor Pierre-Gilles Duguay the Nobel Prize for Physics. Duguay is regarded by some as the Isaac Newton of our time. He was honored for his work explaining liquid crystals, polymers, superconductors, and magnets. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to Professor Richard Ernst of Switzerland. The Academy says techniques developed by Ernst are indispensable in chemical research.
Hay Road in Des Moines. And yet another new branch in downtown Des Moines on the Skywalk, because close counts. We now have 7 convenient Metro Des Moines locations. Hawkeye Bank of Des Moines. Now we're everywhere you are.
Headline News, I'm Chuck Roberts. President Bush today passed over prominent Republicans and conspicuous conservatives, picking a career civil servant as Attorney General. William Barr, the acting head of the Justice Department following Dick Thornburg's resignation, has been appointed to succeed him. Speculation had centered on Missouri Governor John Ashcroft and conservative former California Governor George Deukmejian, but Barr has known the president 15 years, serving as CIA lawyer while Bush was the agency director. The announcement came at a Rose Garden ceremony for law enforcement officers.
Thank you. And I have chosen an individual who was a thorough professional, a defender of individual rights, and a person absolutely committed to this fight against crime.
We have thousands of dedicated men and women at the Department of Justice who do an exceptional job day in and day out, upholding the law, enforcing the law in an even-handed way and with integrity. And I'm proud to be associated with each and every one of them, and if confirmed, proud to lead them.
The White House says the president was impressed by Barr's recent handling of a prison uprising by Cuban inmates in Alabama. Federal agents stormed the jail after a 10-day siege and retook it in 3 minutes. Abortion rights activists and opponents gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court today. Their demonstrations coincided with an abortion-related case being argued before that tribunal. The justices were asked to decide whether federal courts have the authority to deal with anti-abortion protesters who block abortion clinics. Anthony Collins reports.
In Wichita and elsewhere, cutting off access to abortion clinics has emerged as a tactic of the anti-abortion group Operation Rescue. In a counterattack, abortion rights activists have won federal court orders banning blockades, claiming they violate women's civil rights.
If the Supreme Court should rule favorably, that is, to uphold the right of women not to be terrorized by Operation Rescue, then it will acknowledge that women are a protected class.
These federal lawsuits have a very chilling effect on our First Amendment freedom of assembly and freedom of association. People get very nervous about associating with us if they think they're going to be dragged into some multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit.
The Supreme Court case grows out of Operation Rescue blockades in the Washington, D.C. area 2 years ago. Court orders against them were based on an 1871 civil rights law once used against the Ku Klux Klan to prevent attacks on blacks.
And they said, well, if the Ku Klux Klan, why not conceivably somebody else? Although it's very hard to support in anything that they said on the floor of Congress that that's what was meant, that it should apply, for example, to women seeking abortions.
Hoping to continue its blockades, Operation Rescue is asking the Supreme Court to rule that the Ku Klux Klan law does not apply to abortion clinics, a position supported by the Bush administration and anti-abortion groups. They deny that the blockaders are anti-women.
That's absurd, because so much of the pro-life movement is made up of women. Most of the major pro-life organizations are headed by women. Americans United for Life, the pro-life law firm, half the lawyers on the staff are women. I'm a woman, as a matter of fact.
Some abortion rights advocates fear that a ruling favoring Operation Rescue will also signal the court's readiness to overturn legalized abortion. This is the first time the court has agreed to decide whether women seeking abortions are protected by the civil rights law. A ruling is due by July. Anthony Collins, CNN at the Supreme Court.
We have this just in from Killeen, Texas, just outside Dallas. A gunman has opened fire at a Luby's cafeteria restaurant there. Authorities say some people inside are dead, others are injured. They don't exactly know how many. The editor of the local newspaper in Killeen says his wife was in the Luby's restaurant at the time, and he says she told him a man drove a truck through the window, yelled something, and started shooting. The gunman then apparently ran into a bathroom. We have no other details available except to report that some people indeed are dead in that restaurant. The Supreme Court should be operating with a full complement of 9 justices by this time next week. Clarence Thomas, approved by the narrowest margin of any nominee this century, called for a period of healing following last night's vote. The Senate debate, a sex harassment hearing, and 107 days of political skirmishing have taken a toll on the nation's psyche. The woman who levied the harassment charges, Anita Hill, is finding a way back to a law professorship. She says she has no regrets bringing what she considered abusive behavior to light. The White House says it's working on a proposal now to make confirmation hearings go faster, smoother, and if at all, quieter. Unemployed people in the U.S. will have to make do with 26 weeks of jobless benefits, at least for the time being. The Senate failed by 2 votes today to override President Bush's veto of a bill that would have extended payments up to 20 additional weeks. President Bush calls the $6.5 billion measure a budget buster. He's pushing for a less expensive Republican version. During debate, Democrats accused the president of turning his back on the unemployed.
Let them eat cake is not a sensible economic policy, and it's unacceptable social policy. I urge the Senate to override this misguided veto. Sustain the president's veto. Do not bust the budget. Do not drive up the deficit. Do not drive up interest rates. Don't destroy jobs in the middle of a recession. And finally, having rejected this proposal, which is a job-destroying proposal, let's adopt an economic program to create jobs.
Congress has yet to override any of President Bush's vetoes. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker is in Israel after winding up 2 days of talks in Syria, trying to work out final details for a proposed Middle East peace conference. Baker acknowledges he failed to persuade Syria to discuss regional issues with Israel before the talks begin, but he says the conference is still on schedule.
There is one issue having to do with the timing of the multilateral negotiations on which there is a difference, and with respect to which we will continue to exchange views.
An Israeli spokesman says Syria's refusal to attend multilateral talks proves it doesn't want peace and may even undermine the conference. The United Nations says it's not knowingly providing cover for Israeli reconnaissance flights over Iraq. Iraq says Israel is timing flights over its airspace to coincide with UN helicopter inspection missions. Iraq is threatening to attack Israeli jets in the future, and it's warning UN helicopters may be caught in the crossfire. UN helicopter pilots confirmed seeing other aircraft in the skies during an October 4th mission. They say they couldn't identify the nationality of the planes. A senior Croatian official says the secessionist Yugoslav Republic is suspending its decision to lift blockades of army bases. That could dash a truce accord signed by the Republic and the Federal Army last week. In another sign of trouble, European community observers are reportedly giving up trying to send a relief convoy to the besieged town of Vukovar. Russian leader Boris Yeltsin is backing Soviet President Gorbachev's efforts to broker peace. He met with the leaders of Serbia and Croatia today in Moscow. And as peace efforts continue, so does the fighting. Zagreb Radio reports at least 6 people dead in overnight clashes. Mark Delmage reports the battles are also leaving more and more people homeless.
In parts of Croatia today, a person can be forced into the growing army of refugees in a matter of seconds. The length of time it takes a mortar round to destroy a house, fire to burn down a farm. From Karlovac Tuesday came more people who must now be classified as homeless, as refugees.
I am running with whatever I can take with me on the bike. I would prefer that they would kill me.
Once picturesque bridges into Karlovac have been transformed into ugly, deadly corridors of smashed trucks used as barricades. Landmines litter the pavement. They're supposed to slow down Yugoslavian federal tanks if they come. One destination of these refugees is Sisak, just a few miles away. The head of the social welfare program there says the town now takes care of at least 14,000 refugees. 120 have been placed in Sisak's only hotel. All of the rest are in private homes and apartments scattered across town.
Now we are facing problems like the people that offer the hospitality are suddenly faced with very common everyday problems. They have like 10 people living in their houses or in their apartments.
The refugee problem has gone on too long. Money is running short. Signs of hopelessness are beginning to show.
Can you imagine how it is when you're left without everything? They were very nice to us to let us stay here, but still nothing, not even the spoon is mine.
Several streets away, a small motel has been given over by the owner to the refugees. These days are long, but for now, the people are safe.
At the end, we will have
CNN Headline News. I'm Lynne Russell. Another crowded restaurant, another massacre by gunfire. But today's carnage in Killeen, Texas surpassed the toll at a suburban San Diego McDonald's 7 years ago. A man rammed his pickup truck through the front of a cafeteria at lunchtime and then mowed down customers at random with a semi-automatic handgun, killing 22, wounding at least 20. The motive isn't known yet, but eyewitnesses say he yelled, "Look what Bell County has done to me," as he got out of his truck.
He did it very calmly. He was not in a hurry. He did it very precise what he had intended to do, I think. And he at no time appeared to me, and I watched him. Whenever he left in front of me, I watched him go on through the building. And that's why I was trying to judge my exit to the building. And he was very calm at all times.
So we looked and seen the man through the glass reload his gun, and it was pointing in our direction again. So he just dropped the phone and climbed back over the counter, and there was a woman in there. We had tried to get her out. She didn't want to come at first, and we told her to come on. We grabbed her, we crawled outside, and we were ducking and ran around towards the back, and some of the people were running out through the back, some of the workers, and at the same time we all met with them and ran across the field to next door high-low and ran in there and told them, call the police, there's a man in there shooting.
It's unclear how the gunman died, but a Texas public safety official says he killed himself after police wounded him. President Bush still has a perfect veto record. Today, the Senate failed to override his veto of a bill to extend unemployment benefits for up to 20 weeks. Mary Tillotson reports.
Bill Lazurko's been looking for work since May, when he got back from the Gulf War.
I learned a lot of things over there in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and perseverance is one of them. And it's coming in handy now, but it's not going to last much longer, I don't think.
Lazurko is among the nearly 8.5 million Americans officially counted as out of work, 6.7% of the workforce. When you add in people who want full-time jobs but can only find part-time, and people who've stopped even looking, Democrats say the real unemployment rate is closer to 10%. The sort of national emergency that ought to get Mr. Bush's attention.
And it's time that this government acts and does what's right for our people for a change.
The bill the president vetoed and 35 Republican senators voted to kill would have extended unemployment benefits by tapping an existing $8 billion unemployment trust fund. Democrats say that trust fund was created with tax dollars precisely to cushion workers during recessions, like the one ending so slowly now.
As millions of Americans struggle, it's not right or fair that a trust fund created for the specific and sole purpose of providing such insurance during times of economic distress isn't used for the purpose for which it was created and is simply permitted to accumulate funds to create an accounting gimmick for the administration.
But Republicans hastened to point out the Democrat-controlled Congress helped design the accounting gimmick. It's called the 1990 Budget Agreement, and it says trust fund surpluses like the one for unemployment benefits are added to the plus side of the federal budget. That makes the federal debt look smaller, at least on paper, and that's why President Bush has accused the Democrats of trying to bust the budget deal they agreed to. President Bush has said he would sign Senator Bob Dole's more modest bill. It includes a scheme for selling unused radio frequencies to pay for extending benefits for the jobless. The Dole bill would not start as much money flowing, and it would not flow as long. But for people who are out of work and almost out of the usual 26 weeks of unemployment, something is better than nothing. And Mr. Bush's veto makes it clear it will be nothing unless he gets a bill from Congress he likes. Mary Tillotson, CNN, the White House.
President Bush wants acting Attorney General William Barr to take over the post on a permanent basis. Mr. Bush nominated Barr Attorney General today, calling him a defender of individual rights and a committed crime fighter. Barr is a 41-year-old career government lawyer. If he's confirmed by the Senate, he'll replace former Attorney General Dick Thornburgh, who resigned to run for a Pennsylvania Senate seat. The Surgeon General helped the American Medical Association launch the Physicians' Campaign Against Family Violence today. Dr. Antonia Novello says doctors often are the first to see victims of abuse, but they may lack the training and sensitivity to help stop the violence. The AMA says its program will help physicians recognize abuse, question patients in a sensitive manner, and refer possible abuse victims to shelters, legal aid, social support, and/or psychiatric services. Both sides of the abortion controversy took their demands to the steps of the Supreme Court today. As the demonstrators rallied outside, the High Court justices heard arguments inside over whether they can use a 120-year-old civil rights law to stop blockades of clinics where abortions are performed. The Supreme Court's expected to vote on the issue by July. Controversy has surrounded such birth control clinics since the first one opened in the United States in 1916. Gary Tuckman has more.
Few people in this Brooklyn, New York neighborhood realize what used to be where this housing project now stands. Exactly 75 years ago, the first birth control clinic in the U.S. was opened at that location. And the woman who opened it is known as the leader of the birth control movement, Margaret Sanger. She was a public health nurse who knew that giving contraceptive information was at the time illegal, but wanted to help women who had unwanted pregnancies and who often performed their own abortions. 90-year-old Dr. Sherry Appel worked with Sanger starting in the 1920s, and despite outside pressures, never thought twice about her clinic's work, which consisted of giving birth control advice and dispensing diaphragms.
I assumed that that was the thing to do, was to help them because they needed it. It was a part of medical training.
Only 9 days after the first clinic opened, Sanger was arrested and the clinic was shut down. Even years later, after individual states started to legalize contraception advice, politicians tried to ban Sanger from speaking, and the flamboyant Sanger used props to indicate her displeasure. Margaret Sanger's grandson is now the chief executive of Planned Parenthood in New York.
Her most important legacy is that women now have control of their lives. They are not subject to the whims of their husbands about how many children they're going to have and when they're going to have them.
But these days, there's still controversy attached to birth control clinics because many of them also provide abortions. Although Planned Parenthood prefers that women successfully use contraception, they stress that all women should have the right to terminate a pregnancy. Here at New York's Margaret Sanger Clinic, the woman with her back to the camera is about to get an abortion.
The doctor will examine you before he does anything at all.
And to the nurse's chagrin, the patient has never before used birth control.
You will also get your birth control pills today, okay? And you have to start them on Sunday.
Obviously, not everyone who's sexually active takes the proper precautions. And the author of a historical book about birth control says if Margaret Sanger were around today, nothing would frustrate her more.
That Margaret Sanger was an extremely effective, charismatic leader, and that much more was accomplished because of her ego and drive and flair than might have been anticipated.
Margaret Sanger died in 1966, living just long enough to see the U.S. Supreme Court legalize contraception for married couples in 1965. Gary Tuckman, CNN, New York.
The Federal Trade Commission says the makers of the liquid diets OptiFast, MetaFast, and UltraFast make false and unsubstantiated claims. The FTC says customers are led to believe the medically supervised products pose no health risk and keep the weight off indefinitely. The companies have agreed to replace unsubstantiated claims with documented facts. In Stockholm today, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has announced the Nobel Prizes for Chemistry and Physics. Richard Ernst of Switzerland was awarded the prize in chemistry. He helped develop a more accurate method of analyzing the chemical makeup of substances. And French researcher Pierre-Gilles Dejean won the prize for physics. The Academy recognized his contributions to the development of the liquid crystal displays used on calculators, digital watches, and computer screens. Russian Republic leader Boris Yeltsin is hoping his support for the ceasefire in Yugoslavia's Republic of Croatia isn't too late. Today, Yeltsin backed a peace plan brokered by Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev and signed yesterday by the presidents of Croatia and Serbia. Despite the 9th ceasefire agreement, fierce fighting is reported across Croatia, and Croatian guards are fortifying their positions. Fighting recently has been reported in a city located about 50 miles from the Croatian capital of Zagreb. Also today, Croatia announced the arrest of dozens of people on suspicions of working for the Yugoslavian army. Secretary of State James Baker says a Middle East peace conference still is on course. Baker's in Israel now, where he met with Palestinians and will meet with Israeli officials tomorrow. Neither group has promised to attend the conference. Also today, Baker did win Syria's final but conditional approval. Before he flew to Jerusalem, Syria's foreign minister told Baker Israel must negotiate certain territories. That and other issues could jeopardize prospects for peace. The White House says the Mideast conference may be opened personally by Presidents Bush and Gorbachev. Both have been involved in trying to get all the parties together. Sources say the talks are scheduled to begin October 29th in Switzerland. Americans went to the polls today to elect their first president, that is Armenians. The current chairman of the parliament is expected to win this historic election. After he cast his ballot, he pledged to lead the Soviet Republic to full independence. Election results are expected tomorrow. Now that the United States formally has recognized Latvia's independence, it's trying to help the republic out. Dennis Edwards reports some Latvians are learning firsthand about democracy and capitalism.
Imants Daudish is the secretary of the Latvian Supreme Council, their equivalent of the U.S. Speaker of the House. He and 4 other high-ranking officials are in Michigan for a 2-week crash course on democratic government. The group is also listening to companies willing to invest in their newly independent republic.
We want to sign in future some contracts with some companies here who must help us to create some joint ventures and etc.
Which companies, might I ask? Would you like to get to know?
This is a little secret.
Michigan and Latvia have a lot in common. Both have similar climates, and their economies are based on a mixture of agriculture and industry.
Latvia is one of the strongest of the breakaway Soviet republics, and economic reawakening is sweeping the country. Some U.S. companies are already benefiting from this relationship.
One of the first major joint ventures into the Eastern Bloc was a Michigan company into Latvia, and that is the Kellogg Company, which will provide cereals for much of Eastern Europe. And that we think that that's just the beginning.
You met many senators. They are also elected for 4 years. So the policies that we're working on are reviewed by those people that elect us every 2 years.
Delegates pay strict attention to details of the U.S. political system, a system they may borrow heavily from in the years ahead.
Up until last year, we did have a Democratic governor and a Democratic House of Representatives and then a Republican Senate.
This trip won't produce any quick solutions to the challenges facing Latvia. In fact, delegates say it will take years to put this information to use. Dennis Edwards for CNN, Lansing, Michigan.
Okay.
Coming up on Headline News, bringing the newsstand home with the video magazine and some new plans for the old political player.
This is CNN Headline News.
I was ready for my vacation, but afraid of being locked into inflated rental car rates. Suddenly, everything fell into place.
Help you with that excess baggage.
Thanks, she's not with me.
I mean those inflated prices.